So, typography is emotion. Typography is upholding standards. Typography is a series of decisions. Typography is layout. This is from Willy Kuntz's book. Typography is hierarchy, as described by Jan Chickold. Typography is typeface choice, or, as I like to say, typeface choices. Typography is the relationship between type size, line length, and leading. Look at that, that was good. Typography is white space. Typography is macro and micro spacing. Typography is system. Typography is sequence and pace. Typography is lining up and not lining up at the same time. I see a brilliant meme produced by my students in France that describes this perfectly. Typography is craft. According to Richard Sennett, who estimated in his book The Craftsman, you need 10,000 hours or 5 years of study and practice to master a specific craft. Typography is knowledge. Typography is the production of language. Typography is uppercase or lowercase. And I read from the Daily Star from the 19th of February 2025 with a headline: capital letters in messages are at risk of dying out as they are perceived as shouty. Studies have shown that Generation Z prefer to use all lowercase because writing capitals feels stern and abrupt. In contrast, they believe lowercase has a more friendly tone. And again, these are very much typographic choices. And this is the generation that's grown up online. The line between formal and informal communication is blurred. Lowercase writing is a way to reject the authority and rigidity associated with traditional grammar. It fosters an atmosphere of inclusivity and emotional connection. That's from the article from the Daily Star, which I'm sure you can find on their website. Of course, typography is theory. And of course, you're here because typography is theory and practice. And this conference really aims to explore how some of these theories and propositions that I've just kind of laid out briefly can manifest in practice, can be used to explain practice and become practice itself. And my aim for this conference is to bring this together, is to bring theory and practice closer together across a range of contexts, applications, kind of sitting in between an academic world and also the daily grind of a studio practice that I also run, so we can all learn from each other. And one of my particular strands of research is within typography as the typesetting and arrangement of continuous text, and specifically in editorial and book design. And here you see some unjustified text, also known as range left, which you could describe as an instructional mode. Or you've got centered text, which is symmetrical, which forms an equal balance. Or you've got justified, that creates a straight edge on the left and the right, but of course variable word spacing and letter spaces within the line. And I've been looking at specific and particular examples when typesetting deviates from these three basic arrangements. Combinations of justified and unjustified typesetting happening at the same time within the same paragraph. And I'm really aware this is super niche, especially on a Saturday morning. I gave a talk of my research, of my initial research findings in February this year at the Automatic Type Design Conference in Nancy in France, which you can watch the presentation on my studio's YouTube channel, which currently has 2,007 subscribers. I'm looking to increase that number. And here is a brief summary of my recent findings since this presentation. In 1904, Theodore Lord de Vinne has just one paragraph set unjustified in his book, Modern Methods of Book Composition, describing the terrible fashion or novelty of unjustified setting. And I quote, "This method makes an unsymmetrical page that is unpleasing to the reader, and this raggedness seems slovenly," which I didn't actually know what slovenly meant, so I had to look it up, but it means untidy. However, on close inspection, the long lines are actually justified. How odd. So my question would be, why was this done? How was this done? Could the compositor or keyboard operator not quite work out how to do unjustified text, or not to fully commit to unjustified text? So they kind of did a kind of hybrid version with the long lines justified and the short lines unjustified. I can only really estimate that the process of justification was so embedded with 400 years of doing the same thing that the compositor couldn't quite bring themselves to setting these lines that came so close to the end in another way. The type would have been set either on a monotype or a linotype keyboard and caster that required a highly skilled operator to accurately input line breaks and spacing. For justified text, these machines automatically calculated the correct space for each line based on the length of line, making the process somehow or somewhat automatic. And the same level of automation was not present in unjustified text. The technology hadn't caught up with it. So the keyboard operator had to manually set the correct spacing for each line, which was a more complex and error-prone task. And perhaps this is another reason that the limitations of technology used at the time. Experimental avant-garde literature from the early 20th century is a place where examples can be found, with all types of arrangements going on in this calligram from Pablo Picasso by Apollinaire, where the hollowed-out shapes evoke the contours of objects one might assume belong to Picasso's painting. So what do we have? We've got justified, we've got unjustified, we've got centered, and we've got range right happening all at the same time, all within continuous text. It's kind of amazing. And I presume this would have been set by hand. To a more measured example, in the Penrose Annual from 1938, with its cover designed by Jan Chichold, that seems to follow a refined version of the new typography, of which he wrote so famously about a decade earlier, with justified main text. But the full jacket reveals a mix of both unjustified and justified, with a text that continues from the front cover onto the front and back pages within the same paragraph. It's bizarre. Firstly, as there are little, if any, examples of Chichold actually specifying and using unjustified text, but it does follow the widely held convention at the time that he also promoted of unjustified setting being used for narrow measures. It's an example of typographic theory played out in practice. Moving to the 50s with the Icelandic literary journal Birtinga, which was designed by Dieter Roth, that plays the same game as the de Vinne example from before. The design was a radical shift for Iceland at the time, with Roth ending up in Reykjavík via Germany, Switzerland and Denmark, and has been one of the founders of Spiral, a literary and visual art journal that he co-founded in 1953, for which Rott did the layout that had switched to unjustified text by issue 4. So when zoomed in, you'll also see that the type is set justified and unjustified, the longer lines being justified. If you compare the 3 lines marked on the left, you will see that the word space is tighter on the middle line. Hopefully you can see that. Again, why and how was this done? I can't see this would happen as a specified instruction or concept from Rott. Again, my assumption with a compositor on a monotype machine was just so used to the conventions at the time and the constraints of the machine being predominantly set up for justified setting. And another example I found recently, this is a catalogue from 1974 produced in Belgium. I couldn't scan the whole page to break the spine, so you've only got the left-hand pages, which is why it looks a bit odd. This could sort of be described as unjustified setting with a bit of justification still hanging around. The world was not quite ready for the commitment to unjustified setting, even in the 1970s. There must be many more examples of this going on, really until monotype machines were replaced with photo typesetting. They're really hard to find, and of course they're not possible using Google image searching. So I'm continuing with this obsessive research. Fast forward to 60 years to 2019. Here's a similar situation executed the other way round. This is by Norm, who are based in Switzerland. Seemingly unjustified text, but the text is actually justified to a series of predetermined points that fall towards the end of the line. It produces a perfect mechanical flatterslaft. I think I've pronounced that wrong, but I tried my best, which is the German word for rag, or the shape of the line endings, with 1, 2, 3, 4 points where the text can justify in a repeating sequential way that looks unjustified, but it's actually justified. I hope people get that. This obsessive flatterslats, rag, is a kind of in-joke to those in the know. To me, it's pure Swiss, bringing a certain order to unjustification. And it's very different to what I was taught when I was a student, and I still follow today as a practitioner at Reading University in the 1990s in the Department of Typography and Graphic Communication, with each paragraph thought of as a fuzzy D, marked here in red. The top and the bottom of each paragraph gives the reader the clue of a separate paragraph. Hang Dion's Super Metroid Speed Guide and FAQ from 1996 is a 17,500 word ASCII text in which every single line contains exactly 75 characters, including white spaces. Written in a monospace editor, the guide achieves full justification through the writer's careful word choice. Dion reworded sentences so that they fit, effectively performing perfect manual justification within the range left constraints of ASCII text. This work totally blows me away, and it represents an extreme manifestation of justified and unjustified principles coexisting. Typography achieved through a linguistic precision of hacking the technology used to create the work at the time. And my last example, where the typesetting really defines the arrangement, is this book, Informal, by Cecil Beaumont, designed by Januzzi Smith in 2003, who, according to the acknowledgements, translated the stories on the projects into a seamless innovation of text and image, adding structure of another kind to the content. So much they are co-credited as authors on the cover, but can you work out the arrangement or system? It's made with an internal alignment system that is ragged right or tabbed in the first part of the line, then range left in the next part, made using tabs, which is the exact width of a space. A very laborious task, even in today's current layout software. But it creates this wonderful flow of text that is not aligned on the left or the right, but is internally aligned. These examples in this brief introduction show there is still room for innovation in typesetting. They do require more manual labour to execute in terms of technicality, corrections and design workflow, but they create a dynamism to the page, setting them apart from the bland auto setting world. Becoming part of the dynamic typographic that everyone in this room should strive towards. So, welcome to Leeds. Welcome to Leeds Beckett. My name's Fraser Muggeridge. I'm Professor of Design here, and so great to see you all. People have come from all over the world really to be here today to discuss typography theory, history, visual language and practice.